Since the dawn of time, humans have been asking themselves many of the same fundamental questions. What are we? Who created us? Why do people from Antwerp pronounce moet and moed differently? Today, I will attempt to answer the last question. When I embarked on my European journey in 2018, I was a fresh high school graduate with a passion for linguistics. It was a no-brainer to leave Macedonia for the University of Amsterdam to pursue a linguistics degree. Dutch would be an advantage to me, not a challenge. After all, it's similar to English. I have a knack for the underlying structures of languages, let's say. I would be constantly immersed, and maybe most importantly, my girlfriend, a Dutch as a foreign language teacher from Antwerp, happily promised to entertain any of my questions. A few months before I left my home country, we sat down to cover the basics. We went over greetings, basic grammar, and of course pronunciation. But on my introduction day to university, I surfed to vosweb.nl for our student association VOS. My girlfriend reassured me that, just like asking a Belgian for a bakkie patat may get me a small box of potatoes, Dutchies and Flemings pronounce certain sounds differently. I was on my way again, deciding that it'd be easiest to base my Dutch off hers, since she was my closest language source, and I listened intently around me. Yep, g and g do sound the same in Holland, and indeed, Antwerpian vis sounds exactly like vies to Amsterdam ears. In the Netherlands, people pronounce sounds like u, I, and oe short, she told me. But here, we say them long. She thought she had me caught in her nets, but I was no fool. I'd heard her say boek short, and moeten, and bloem. In search for an answer, however, the Dutch and Flemish conspired against me. Of course it's long, I'd hear from the Antwerpians. It's always short, I'd hear from the Dutch. And in my thirst for justice, I do what any reasonable man would do. I decide to write a paper on it. Just to recap, the idea is that while Dutch people pronounced oe always short, people in Antwerp seem to pronounce it sometimes long and sometimes short. Why? First remarkable thing is that there seems to be very little information on this out there, either in Dutch or in English. While this is exciting from the point of view of a researcher, it's also a little daunting. It means I now have no idea where to start. And well, what do you do when there's nothing to base yourself off of? You collect as much data as you can as a lowly bachelor student during a pandemic, and you throw a bunch of hypotheses at it. So first step is, make a list of words and politely ask as many people if you can record them pronouncing them. At the end, add a list of about 40 words, all containing this mysterious oe sound. So what's next? Well, once we have all the recordings and we analyze them, we see if we can find any explanations. First thing to check is, were the words with a short oe historically different from the words with a long oe? In other words, is it the case that this distinction already existed originally, but is merged in the other varieties? Well, if we look at the course of what we now call Standard Dutch, the answer is, not really. The source of all of the oe sounds has been the same for centuries. Next, we can see if there are any patterns in the words themselves, like for example, the consonant that follows the vowel. Here we find something a little more interesting. Oe seems to be short before a k, p, and j sound. So, boek, stoep, and gloei. It's a little more complicated, of course. You can read my paper if you want to know more information. But it ends up boiling down to that. This doesn't tell us the whole picture, though. Even though we can say that oe is short before a k, b and y sound, this doesn't explain other words with a short u, like bloem or moet. For those, we need to dig in a little more desperately. Before the speakers of Antwerp spoke what we now call Standard Dutch, they spoke a Germanic variety called Brabantian. They in fact spoke their own variant of it, which I'm going to creatively refer to as Antwerp Brabantian. While this differs quite significantly from Standard Dutch, some words happen to sound pretty much exactly the same in both varieties. For example, the word for flower, bloem, and the word for must, moet, sound exactly the same. And despite the fact that this Brabantian variety is now dead for well more than half of Antwerp, about 60 to 70% to be exact, it is exactly these words that explain any unexpected variation. So, in other words, if the traditional dialect has a short oo sound, then the standard language will have one too. So, the previously mentioned words for must and flower, being moet and bloem, have a short vowel in Antwerp Brabantian. And in fact, remember that rule where oo is short before a k, b, and y sound? Well, that rule exists in Antwerp Brabantian as well. So not only can we say that the standard language has in some sense borrowed the short vowel into some words, but we can say that the standard language borrowed the shortening rule itself from the Brabantian dialect. This rule now applied to all oep, ook, and oei words in the standard language, even those with a different vowel originally in the dialect, like the Brabantian snoep, which has a long vowel, and the standard snoep, which has a short vowel. So what does this mean? Let's do a quick summary. The traditional dialect, Antwerp Brabantian, is unfortunately on its way out, with the number of speakers dropping from about 90% to around 30% within just 50 years. However, has directly influenced the currently spoken Standard Dutch by essentially porting the distinction between a long and short oo sound, and the rules that govern its distribution. And seeing how culturally dominant Antwerp is, it seems unlikely that the specific feature will die out anytime soon. Think about what that means. The population of Antwerp, completely unwittingly, is carrying a living fossil of a dying language.